Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of After Hours in the STEM Center with Rance Bobo. This evening, we have a very special guest, Nitin Shankar, who's related to two of our instructors on campus. Also, before we get started, we have a few announcements. So there will be two virtual tours this Friday. We have one to UC San Diego. And we also have a special STEM informational for San Francisco State on Friday as well. You will find that information um, on our STEM Canvas page, but also I will include that information in the chat. So, towards the end of the presentation, I will post that information in the chat. So, with no further ado, I would like to invite our guest to the stage, uh, Nitin Shankar. How are you doing this evening? Uh,
Hey, Rance, can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Excellent. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. We are so glad to have you. So we understand that you work in the biotech industry. But before we get to that, we have to, we want to learn about your academic journey, how you got there, some of the highlights, and, some word of advice for our students who will be eventually going into the workforce, the importance of internships, and, some advice that you wish someone had told you um, as you were embarking upon your journey into industry. So now I understand that you went straight into a 4-year institution, um, and you did not go into the community college, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Straight out of high school, I applied to four-year programs and ended up joining UC San Diego. So very happy that you guys are doing a virtual tour there pretty soon. So I was originally admitted into the biotech major of study. At the time, this was an impacted program, so you had to apply straight out of high school and be accepted into the program. I was really interested in biotech from the historical side, particularly for DNA analysis, looking at history of people migrating, looking at anthropological studies, and I really wanted to do something along those areas. But actually, where I ended up is all due to a chance encounter. I would say one of our family friends in Colorado is a spine surgeon based out of Denver, and he was very keen on showing me how his operating room works and trying to influence me to become a doctor. So I went to the surgery with the surgeon, and for I think it was 13 hours, I stood there next to him. This was in the days when anyone could pretty much walk into a surgery room alongside the surgeon, and he let me stand right next to him. Wasn't scrubbed in, obviously, not quite qualified for that, but he let me stand next to him as he was operating on a patient for 13 hours. He let me see every bit of detail. He would explain all of the anatomy, all of the procedure, all of the work that he was doing. But I wasn't so interested in that. I was actually more interested in the devices he was putting in. So he was putting in rods and screws and nuts and basically like carpentry style tools and implants into a patient to help restore their balance and restore their back mobility. And I was really interested and fascinated by this and ended up talking to the sales rep for that company that was in the room, and struck up a conversation, and told him that I was going to college pretty soon, and told him, yeah, I'll be in San Diego for school pretty soon. Where are you guys located? And he said, oh, we're in San Diego, like 2 miles away from where your school is. So it was pretty exciting to hear that, and became fascinated by that work. It ended up changing my major, I think in my second year, from biotech to bioengineering, and focused on medical devices ever since. I actually ended up doing an internship at that company while I was still in school, and went back afterwards a few years after graduating as a full-time employee as well.
Okay. Okay. Wow. All right. So we're going to break that down a little bit. Okay. So first and foremost, he said you had the opportunity to stand in the operating room for 13 hours while a surgeon had worked on a patient.
Yes, that's right. I was very tired at the time, but at the end of it, I told the surgeon, "Thank you so much for letting me watch. I'm not quite sure I want to be a doctor after standing on feet for 13 hours, but I'm really interested in the stuff that the other guy over there is doing." And I think he was still the surgeon was definitely very gracious about it, and actually helped me contact people at the company afterwards, and um, it really was a great source of networking for me in my path.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty impressive. Um, and then so because of that experience, you already knew that okay, I want to go into this. So let me ask you, um, when you knew that you wanted to go into bioengineering, did that make it easier for you to, stay focused um, during, uh, your academic journey? Because sometimes, engineering can be very exhausting. Sometimes students, they get turned away due to the rigor um, of engineering. So, with you already knowing that you want to be a bioengineer, was that a source of, all right, let's keep moving?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that has always been instilled in me from my parents and from my family was always the idea of doing something productive for society, doing something that will help people. And for me, I viewed medical device engineering as a path to do that. Um, if I didn't want to be a surgeon, I figured that the next best thing is to develop the devices that the surgeons are using and providing to the patients to improve their quality of life or to save their lives. And I think that definitely helped me keep perspective and kind of stay focused, like you mentioned. But at the same time, I think medical devices and bioengineering was just so broad. At UCSD, there were 4 or 5 different majors related to bioengineering, like biosystems, bioengineering, which is the one I ended up doing, biotechnology, bioinformatics, and then there was a pre-med track for anyone that wanted to get engineering experience, but also become a doctor. And I think because of the fact that we were exposed to all of these different classes, all of these different topics, it did ultimately make it a little bit harder when we trying to enter the workforce. What am I qualified for? What would I be able to actually do for a company? Oops, accidentally stopped the video there. What would I be able to actually do or provide to a company? And that was actually another part of my journey that I ended up taking a little bit after college to try to figure out what exactly I wanted to do as well.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So then, so you mentioned that you were fortunate. I mean, because listening to your experience, it's just like everything just happened to line up. You this is one of those let's say dream come true type of scenarios. You really didn't have to, go searching and put in all those applications. You just have to be at the right place at the right time. But even then, no, I mean, you took advantage of that particular situation because sometimes, people see a pot of gold in front of them and, they look at it and walk right past it. But in this particular case, you just continued and you pursued it. So during your, we always encourage our students to take advantage of internships. And so you said with this particular company, which happened to be in San Diego, you did an internship with them while you were a student.
Yeah, so actually, so I had applied for internships, particularly in the specific area I was looking for in product development. Unfortunately, I didn't get those positions, but I still networked with the managers and with some of the other folks on the team as well. And they actually ended up coming back to me and said, "Hey, we have a part-time position that's opening up. It may not be in engineering, but would you still be interested in doing it?" And it was the position was as an OR technician. So this company actually had a mock operating room built so that they could bring surgeons in, sales reps in, and train them using cadavers on the latest surgical techniques and how to place the implants or how to go through the full procedure. And the position they offered me was an operating room technician. So essentially cleaning instruments, setting up the cadavers, helping to lay out the instruments for the day, and sometimes even scrubbing into take part in the surgery or being an assist or manning like X-ray machines, for example. So at the time, obviously, it wasn't the most glamorous, or it wasn't in line with what a lot of my colleagues were doing. Um, but ultimately, I still got a chance to work with the engineers or network with the engineers. I got to meet with surgeons and really um, or I'd say understand that I enjoy working with people. I wanted to be in kind of a cross-functional role where I get to interact with surgeons, with engineers, with everybody really to further a product. And um, again, I was very lucky and very fortunate to have that experience. And I feel like I definitely want to share that. It may not necessarily, like you mentioned, it may not necessarily have been everybody's case, but very fortunate and grateful to have those opportunities.
Right, right. Also, something else that you said. Well, before I get to that, I'd like to encourage all of our viewers. If you have any questions, we are taking the questions live, and we will be answering them. So, go ahead and type your questions in the you type your questions, and we will answer them as they come in. So, you also mentioned something too about the support of your parents, or or just the viewpoint of your parents, and choosing um, a major or a career. Sometimes it's solely based on money. Be a doctor or an engineer because they make a lot of money. They make good money, but you were told you know do something that's going to help people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so how has that um, directed your choice in what you decided to pursue as a major and career?
Yeah. So from the beginning, like I mentioned, even like going back to the biotechnology, like I talk a little about the history and all of that, but I was also really interested in like organ creation or artificial organs and essentially finding out new ways to help people. And I think that was always there. Even when I was looking for jobs in the biotech or bioengineering field, um, I would always ask myself, like, what is the greatest impact? What are the positions or what are the roles where I can help a variety of people? And I think throughout my career, that's always been on my mind. And like, even if I'm working through a hard day, getting through all the meetings, getting through the projects and doing a lot of work, at the end of the day, if I take a step back and just remember and keep in mind that I'm doing this to help out somebody else's mother, somebody else's father, a family member, loved one, it just puts things into perspective and just keeps me going as well.
Yeah, I have to say that you know me having a chance to work with your parents in different facets, I mean, they really have set the example of truly, working with, people, in particular, our students. And, they have a genuine interest in the students that they serve and that they work with. So, I mean, I'm glad that has rubbed off on you. I mean, because that's, you know, to be genuine, to find people who are genuine and really wanting to help individuals or others, it's hard to find, especially nowadays. But they set a great example. So
They
yeah.
certainly do. That's right, Mom. I know you're watching this, and Dad, I know you'll watch it later. So here's a hidden message for you, at least.
So we have a question from one of the viewers. Because you mentioned that you were working and going to school. So the question is, how is balancing your part-time job as a operating room technician and going to school full time? And was it difficult, especially with a bioengineering major?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was actually pretty fortunate that the position at the company was only on Fridays and Saturdays. So um, earlier in the week, they would call based on the schedule of surgeons or the number of surgeons they would have coming in and ask me, hey, what's your availability on Friday, either in the morning, or the afternoon, or for the full day? What's your schedule on Saturday? So I had some flexibility, and again, I was just very fortunate to be in that kind of role. Um, I think in actually subsequently after graduating, I decided to work for about a year or so and then apply to grad programs. And I ended up landing an internship at a company at the same company while doing my master's at the same time. And again, the master's program that I fell into was very fortunate. It was actually meant for people who are working full time and also wanted to go to school. So classes were on Fridays and Saturdays again. So like you said, Rance, everything kind of just lined up perfectly. It was just pots of gold. But um, I will say that if you do want to go into industry, if you do want to use your internships best, I think it's definitely worth it to try to balance the industry experience and the academic experience as well. And if there's a way that you can do that, that I think was my biggest suggestion there.
Okay. So you found that because you mentioned that they called earlier in the week. So I guess you found a way to really like communicate with him like, hey, this is what's going to work for me, um, and this is not. So I guess that that communication with your employer is important.
Absolutely. The communication up front was very important. And especially as we got closer to final exams or midterms, excuse me, they were very, very understanding of that and encouraged me to make sure that I was studying properly at the same time. Um, so yeah, they would call or text me a few days in advance and just double check. I was fortunate that I could also, or I had arranged my schedule earlier in the quarter to kind of accommodate that as well. So that way I made sure I didn't really have classes or they were optional classes on Friday. Mom, you weren't supposed to hear that, by the way. Sorry about that. But yeah, I was able to kind of clear my schedule for Friday so that way I could dedicate either the full day or at least a half day if I didn't have homework or other stuff going on as well.
Okay, okay, yeah, because sometimes sometimes people get this fright of their employers or their opportunities, like, oh no, I got to say yes because I don't want to lose out on this opportunity. But it's just like, wait a minute, what's what's the mission here? It's just like, in order for you to really enjoy that opportunity, you need to complete that degree. So sometimes people get that stage fright, so to speak. you
Hmm.
know so we have
Yeah.
another question.
Oh,
Oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
I was going to say one more thing actually. So when I went back to school for my master's while I was working full time, I had to have that exact same conversation with my manager and told him, "Hey, I got into this program. It's right down the road. It was at UCSD as well." Um, and I told him, I really want to do this program because I feel like it'll help my career. It'll also help me here at the company, not just for internal opportunities, but it'll help in the day-to-day work that I do as it is. And worked out a schedule with him so that instead of having to take like extra time off on Fridays or having to use up vacation time, we found a way that I could do like front load a lot of my work in the rest of the week and then take either a half day or a full day to attend the class fully. And the class was also set up so that everything was recorded online. So even if I went for the first half of the day, I could still watch the lecture for the second half and then follow up with the professor the next day in class. So again, that communication was key to make sure that my boss knew what was going on, and luckily he was very supportive. And even after the program ended, he was very supportive in helping me find that new opportunity or that new role within the company that the program actually had prepared me for.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So we have a question. Um, we have two questions from the audience. So the first one is, was your study? What was your study schedule like? Uh, did you have a set routine to study, and tips to be a productive student? So you can
Oh
see the
wow!
questions. You can see the questions as well, can't you?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
can.
Okay. So you go ahead. We'll take that first one.
All right. So trying to think back, what was my studying schedule like? So um, in the 4 year programs, at least at UCSD, if you have multiple classes, or when you're building your schedule, you do have a little bit of flexibility about making sure your classes are loaded on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, or kind of spread out throughout the week. So I think the way that most of my classes were spread out, just by nature of which classes I was taking and the availability of those classes, I think in general, I was fortunate again to have either half day chunks or even several hours between classes where I could go to the library or I could go to a study spot on campus and spend some time. And admittedly, I did not study as well as I should have or could have. Mom, you already know about this. Um, but I do think that if I went back in time and changed some of those patterns or some of those routines, I think that I would have spent a little bit more time kind of trying to focus on the material, trying to anticipate what kind of questions would be on an exam, I think we were fortunate to also have a lot of resources from prior exams or prior quizzes or prior midterms that were either shared with us by people who are senior to us or even available online, whether it was through the professor's website or other sources. Um, and that definitely, like doing those kinds of practice questions, doing those kinds of quizzes definitely helped at least prepare for what kind of questions could be there. Obviously, it may not be the same as same numbers or the same units or whatever, but overall, in terms of the patterns or in terms of the way the professor was thinking, those definitely helped. Um, I guess in terms of like a set routine, I didn't really have a set routine until it came down to midterms or finals, where pretty much just had to block time and avoid video games, avoid the internet, and really just try to focus on studying. I think kind of a combination of reading through slides, reading through lectures, as well as doing practice questions, practice quizzes, seem to work the best for me at least.
Okay, excellent. And then there's another question. Could you give tips on how to network with other professionals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think forums like this are a great place to start, especially if you see an area that piques your interest and you're fascinated by. It's always a great idea to reach out and try to see um, if if you have any other questions to ask the speakers any other questions. So I'm always open to taking questions or having phone calls to answer any questions you may have. I think another great source is LinkedIn. I think that's definitely emerged as a contender for one of the best ways to network. I mean, especially if there's a particular company you're interested or a field that you're interested in, you're able to go into LinkedIn and see kind of the different people that are there, people that may have been in, may have gone to the same college or same community college as you, that you can reach out to and just message and say, hey, I'm a recent student or I'm a current student at this college and really interested in what you're doing. Do you mind speaking to me or giving me a little bit more information? And I find that that's helped a lot. I've been on the receiving end of that recently, and it's definitely a pleasure to talk with students or graduates who are interested in this realm as well.
All right. So, you know, um, you've mentioned, in this discussion, Mom, you already know about that. It's so now now you have students who want to know about that experience. So so the question is, I mean, well, it's kind of good because as I'm listening to your experience, it's like, wow, this guy, everything has lined up and everything has just been a cakewalk, so, just like everything is. So the question is, they really want to know, can you tell us about the experience that your mom already knows about, where you just mentioned about not studying enough? What kind of student were you?
Yeah. So I will say that I wasn't a terrible student. I passed all my classes. I did well enough to end up going to grad school afterwards. I did well enough to get a job. But I wasn't like a straight A. I wasn't at the very top of my class. And that's something that I really wish that I really focused on. A lot of my close friends, even now who I keep in touch with from college, are definitely were at the top of the class. And I really wish I could have joined them in that. Um, I will say that um, it had to do a lot with the techniques I think of studying, or I felt overconfident many times, like, oh yeah, I've read this section, I know this pretty well, I can remember this diagram, and when push came to shove on the day of the midterm, just didn't stick. And um, I think a part of that may have also been that I studied the wrong things in certain cases. Like I mentioned about having access to quizzes or having access to prior exams, that definitely helps. But sometimes you fall into a trap of, oh yeah, this type of question was on the quizzes 3 years in a row. It's going to be there. I can write this down on my cheat sheet or on the notepad that the professor allows. Or I think there were some classes where they allowed us to use our textbooks during the exam or use an open binder, bring anything you want into the exam with you. And definitely fell into the trap of not studying enough or not being prepared enough and kind of relying on a textbook a little too much. And at that point, I think kind of lost some, I'd say that kind of practicality or some of the ways of thinking that could have helped during the exam at that time.
Okay, well, that's good to hear because it just goes to show that hey, you are human, and you're just like the rest of the students that we serve, some of the students that we serve. Also, though, too, you mentioned like being the top of the class. So you were not the top of the class, but have you ever gone hungry or homeless because you were not in the top of the class, or jobless because you were not in the top of the class?
No, I'm very fortunate to say that I haven't been in any of those situations, even though I wasn't at the top of the class. I think one thing that employers really look at more so than the GPA or the grades that are on your resume are really the activities that you've done, the different projects that you've done, the skills that you've learned, and especially if you do internships, especially if you do lab experiences or working in a lab when you're in a 4-year program. Those definitely go a long way to show that even if you don't necessarily have the grades, you're willing to learn, you're willing to have the skills. Because let's face it, when in a company, we have access to our notebooks, we have access to resources that you are not allowed to on an exam, right? You have access to Google, you have access to everything, to all these research papers to help and really find out what you're looking for. So I think that's really what the employers are looking for, right? They're looking for, are you interested in the subject? Are you passionate about it? Are you willing to learn? Are you teachable? Are you open to gathering new skills? And of course, if you get certifications for different programs or different softwares, those definitely go a long way as well, because then it shows again that you've taken that initiative to learn that software that you know is relevant to your field of study and helps you ultimately in your career.
Excellent. Um, I think the students will appreciate that, because sometimes, there's a lot of pressure on them to, hey, you have to be the best, you have to be the top. I mean, that's not necessarily a, requirement. And of course, if a student wants to strive for that, hey, we're not knocking that, but at the same time, we don't want students to feel like, they're imposters if they're not, at the top. So then we have another question. Have you ever taken any community college classes, and how was that experience?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. At UC San Diego, the general education requirements are split into 6 different colleges or 6 different schools within the campus. So even if you're engineering, you would fall into one of these 6 different colleges, where you have to take different general education requirements like foreign languages, math, science, reading, history, music, all kinds of things. So the particular college that I went to is called Ravel College in San Diego, and they wanted you to be a jack of all trades. So you have to take classes, like I mentioned, science and math, regardless of what major you are. So one of the classes that we had to take was humanities, or essentially philosophy. So it was a 5-quarter series. So I believe I took the first 3 at UC San Diego as part of the regular schedule. And then the last 2 I decided to take at a community college in San Diego. I don't remember the name of the college off the top of my head, but the classes were very small. It was much smaller than being in a lecture hall full of 200, 300 people that you already know. And I was the only person in that classroom who was in a 4-year program at that time. And I believe I took English literature and American literature. And like I mentioned, I was the only person in the 4-year program, but still definitely an interesting experience. It was almost like a combination of high school and college um, in terms of the way that the class was run. There was a lot of reading, a lot of quizzes, but at the same time, obviously uh, I would say the rigor of the courses weren't necessarily the same rigor as uh, in the 4-year programs. That being said, the material was still engaging. The professors were still very passionate. I would argue even more passionate than some of the professors I had in undergrad. A lot of the professors in undergrad are focused on research or focused on grants and fellowships, and didn't necessarily care about teaching. They didn't necessarily have that passion for being a great teacher and making sure that students understood the material and really grasped that material. But the community college professors that I had were very engaging, very interested in making sure that you actually learn the material. And I think I walked away from those classes definitely having an understanding, or at least having an appreciation for what the community college professors go through. So, Mom, thanks for the question, and definitely understand what you go through.
Um, so I have a follow-up question to that. Being a student, I know when you got into your upper division courses, you had to do a lot of group work. You know, so I'm assuming that you worked with students who did transfer from the community college. So what was your observation? Because you went straight through the 4 year, and then you have the community college students coming in. You guys are working together. So I mean, so what was your impression of the community college students as far as like maybe were they prepared? Did they deserve to be there, so to speak? So and did you guys just make it happen?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I think most of the projects I worked on were with at least one or two other transfer students. Um, and I think they were very well prepared from the programs they came in from. They hit the ground running. They meshed with us right away. Um, Truthfully, I didn't even know that they were transfer students until they told us when we were talking about, hey, where do you guys live, or where are you guys commuting from? Since most of us lived off campus at that point, and um, yeah, I mean they pretty much were they were one of us at that point. They were part of the class. They were part of the group, and um, I hope that they felt the same way as well.
Okay. So another question, how did you feel about smaller classes at the community college? As far as, you mentioned, 200, 300, individual students in the lecture hall. Um, how did you feel about that as far as
Yeah,
learning and taking things in?
yeah. I think, like I said, it was definitely a more engaging experience. You feel a lot more free to ask questions or even to answer questions. Um, I felt sometimes in those 200, 300 people classes, the professors are really just trying to rush through, get through the material. And especially because UC San Diego's on quarter system, where you only have about, I think it was 10 weeks for a class before the entire class is over. The professors were just trying to get through the material and get you to a point where you could take the midterm or take the final by the end of the quarter. So a lot of the question time was really reserved more so for office hours or via email. Um, I think the community college programs or the classes that I went to really facilitated that, because even if it was not as often, or it was a shorter class than a quarter, I just took it over summer. Um, the professors were still very willing to listen to questions or to answer any questions that people had, and I believe they even stayed pretty late. Our I think our classes got dismissed around 9 p.m. and they stuck around to answer questions that students had.
Awesome. Excellent. Um, okay. So next question, pertaining to, we asked about, group work and projects. So what would your senior project, what was that? Yeah, what was it on? You know,
Yeah. So if I remember right, um, we were given basically a list of different projects that we could work on, and you got to choose which one you worked on, and they would list a professor and any sponsors. And there was one professor I really wanted to work with who was part of the cardiac mechanics research group at UC San Diego, and his classes were always the most entertaining, the most engaging. He was one of my favorite professors, actually, which is why I wanted to do my senior project with him. And the project that I did was creating a heart rate monitor for large animal studies. So a lot of his group's work was done on larger animals, particularly dogs, and they wanted to have a heart rate and oxygen monitor to make sure that the animals were getting proper oxygenation to their blood cells and able to stay alive. Obviously, they had standard vet staff and a lot of other monitoring tools, but they wanted us to come up with something novel, or come up with a method that would be easily visible in the operating room. So we did a lot of research with the professor in terms of watching his surgeries or watching the group surgeries. We got to spend time with the lead surgeon, as well as some of the people in the room who were doing those surgeries, to ask them what kind of requirements they wanted. How loud do you want something? What about the visibility? Like, where should it be visible from? How big should signage be? And in the end, we actually ended up going with a very simple implementation, where we were able to buy a pulse oximeter to measure the blood oxygen content off of Amazon. I think we paid $50 for it. And we found that by attaching it to a dog's ear, you could still measure the amount of oxygen that was circulating through the body. And now we just had to come up with a way to display that information into the operating room for the staff to see. So we tried to find ways to hook up this monitor. The monitor was probably just a couple of inches big. The screen was extremely small and could just be hidden behind the fur or behind the animal. So we ended up looking at wiring and basically created a way to mirror whatever was on the screen, or whenever the LED lights for the monitor would show up. We found a way to mirror that onto a much bigger LED screen that could be seen across the room for the surgeon at any given time.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think we had a couple of constraints there. We had a budget constraint, so we had to make sure we didn't go over budget. Obviously, we had a timeline constraint in terms of like 1 or 2 quarters to actually work on this project. But I will say that one part of the project that I definitely gained an appreciation for was leveraging existing technology and not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think if we tried to create our own oxygen monitor and heart rate monitor, it would have taken a lot more than the budget that they gave us. It would have taken a lot more time and resources than were available at the time. But we found a simple and effective mechanism to still give the information, or to fulfill that clinical need at the end of the day.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I'm just curious, did you ever have to deal with animal cruelty laws? I mean, you were putting this on a dog. I mean, did you guys have to ever deal with stuff like that?
We had to take very basic courses about it just to learn about some of the ethics or some of the rules and regulations around it. But we didn't have to do any formal training. The vets and the vet staff and the doctors were still kind of the attending people and the ones in charge of touching the animals. So we couldn't touch the animals directly, but we could direct the surgeon and the staff to manipulate the animal or manipulate the device as we wanted them to.
Okay. That's pretty cool. I mean, because you had to work with um, you know you weren't just stuck in your engineering community. You had to go outside that community in order to make this happen, which is cool, which is really cool.
Absolutely. And I will say, in medical devices, one unfortunate side effect of all the regulations around medical device testing and everything is that sometimes you have to operate on animals, and um, it's very tough to do. But at the end of the day, if you are treating them humanely, treating them kindly, and remember that they're serving a purpose, and that they're doing this, or they're being sacrificed to further the development or further technology that can ultimately help people or help a wide population of people, that helps me sleep a little bit better at night.
Yeah, that's good. Because sometimes people don't have that. They just look at it's just a lab rat, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've got some questions from the crowd. Boy, they just keep coming in, which is good. You know,
Absolutely.
it
Keep them
makes
rolling.
life a whole lot easier. So we're going to focus on the grad school aspect, because we are getting questions on that, and then we'll move into the questions that pertain to the career. So, why did you decide to go to grad school?
Yeah, so like I mentioned a little bit earlier, bioengineering at UCSD is very broad. The major itself is split into 6 different majors. So there was like bioengineering with a biotech emphasis, with a systems emphasis. I was in a medical device track, and even in the medical device track, you still get exposed, or you still take classes in all kinds of things. We took classes in genetics. We took classes in tissue engineering, and how do you create, or what are the different levels of tissue in the body, and how do you create those, or um, engineer those in a lab. We took classes on biomechanics, so like how strong are bones, how strong are muscles, your veins, your arteries. We also took classes in medical imaging. So how does that ultrasound work? How is that compared to an X-ray or a CT or a PET scan? So coming out of college, I honestly didn't know which of those areas I wanted to go. I was fascinated by everything. I still get fascinated by everything. I love learning about these. And I ended up doing an internship in India for GE, General Electric, that focuses on healthcare and focusing on creating a low sound or low cost, low power ultrasound device. And I tremendously enjoyed that experience. It was great to go to a different country and work and experience that culture for a significant amount of time. But at the end of the internship, I walked away still kind of unsure about what I wanted to do. So I ended up applying to grad school because I felt that um, depending on the type of program, I could try to narrow my interests a little bit more and move either towards orthopedics or towards cardiac or something else. And ultimately I ended up choosing the UCSD program because it was kind of broad at the same time, and I still had I since I was working at the same time, I got a chance to kind of experience what orthopedics was like and really develop a passion for that. Excuse me. And I felt that that program ultimately was the right one for me because we still got exposed to everything that is applicable to orthopedics as well as to other branches that, if I want to switch into, are still available.
Okay. And so another question is, did you also have any other projects or maybe your thesis for your master's, program? So you talked about your senior project. Was there another project in the master's program that you completed, or can you talk about your thesis?
Yeah, so the master's program that I did was focused on essentially at the end of the day presenting a device. So there were two parts of our final project. One was to actually design a device, and the other was to present that device or pitch that device to investors, if you will. They were surgeons, there were some angel investors, venture capitalists who came in at the end of the year. So we basically had to wow them. We weren't necessarily trying to pitch for money, but it was a good experience or practice in terms of if you want to start up or if you have a project idea, how do you go about getting funding for that? So in terms of the actual project itself, I was working full time at the orthopedic company, the spine company in San Diego. And again, that line of communication, I went and told some of the engineering directors or management, hey, I'm part of this master's program. If you guys have any ideas or any concepts that you guys were working on that you didn't get to fully elaborate or fully design, I'd love to use that as part of my design project if that's possible. So I got to work on one of the projects, which was essentially creating a new type of rod and screw to use in spine surgery. So I got to work with a couple of surgeons who came in for cadaver labs. So working with them, emailing them, asking them questions throughout, asking for feedback based on the different designs, asking about how it's used clinically or its potential to be used clinically, and then also designing some prototypes and actually using the resources uh, on the company campus, such as a machine shop or prototyping devices, to actually build a physical device. And then at the end of the year, I was able to pitch that. But I would say that one part of that project, like I mentioned, we had to pitch that, was actually coming up with a project plan. So going through a business proposal or a business plan in terms of what is my distribution plan? What is my quality assurance plan? What is my manufacturing plan? How will I manufacture this? So because I was going through the company, I had a lot of those resources and I was able to kind of get away or I guess get away is the wrong phrasing, but I was able to leverage a lot of those resources as part of my plan as if I was pitching it for an internal business review or internal project funding review. So long story short, I went to my engineering managers and basically dug up a project that they hadn't been working on or that they were interested in and was able to leverage that to do that as my senior project or sorry, as my master's project.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent. So now we have questions pertaining to what you're currently doing now. But so what is it that you are doing um, from your typical 9 to 5?
Yeah, so my role is a clinical development engineer. And that's a very fancy way of saying that I'm the voice of the customer. I basically speak on behalf of the surgeon throughout the development process. So I get to meet with surgeons, I get to meet with my marketing counterparts, engineering counterparts, and my role is to listen to the surgeons, understand what are the clinical problems that they're facing or what are the clinical needs that they need in their operating rooms to perform their surgeries. And then I work with marketing to create those requirements um, and pass that to engineering. So once engineering actually develops a product, they come back to me and ask me to test it in lab or in a benchtop setting. So I get to basically play with the prototypes. I get to play with the different iterations of the product throughout its life cycle and provide feedback and basically say, yes, this is working, this is great, or no, this needs to change. We are facing these clinical risks, or this would not work in a procedure or in a surgery because of this, this, and this. So like I said, my role is really the speaker of the surgeon or the voice of the customer, and I definitely take that very seriously. In fact, today I had quite a few meetings where I had to push back on things saying that they weren't quite ready for showtime. They weren't quite ready to actually go through formal testing because they wouldn't meet the surgeon's requirements, or they wouldn't meet the clinical requirements that are there.
All right. All right. And technically, you're the voice for me because, if they're trying to rush a product, you know, I don't want that, in my body.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that. So we like to call it the orange jumpsuit test. So because we're a heavily regulated industry, we're regulated by the FDA in the US, we're regulated by Japan, like the Japanese equivalent of the FDA or the Chinese equivalent of the FDA. And we have to make sure that the product is safe and effective before it goes out the door or before it goes into a patient. So we call it the orange jumpsuit test because if it doesn't work correctly or it doesn't work as intended, you could theoretically be in an orange jumpsuit. And I don't want to do that. So that's why, for me, quality of the product, making sure that the product is safe and effective and actually works as intended, is extremely important. Some other folks called it the grandmother test or the mother test. Like, would you want this device or this implant being used in your grandmother or in your mother? Um, and if your decision did not meet the test, then clearly it's not ready for showtime.
Okay. So, what is an orange jumpsuit, just to be clear?
Orange jumpsuit is going to jail. There are some incidents where a product failed or a product did not work, and some people received prison time because of that.
Ah, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we don't want no orange jumpsuits.
Not at all.
All right. So, now there's a question from one of the viewers pertaining to what you expected when you went into the workforce and then the realities. So, have your expectations uh, met the realities, or was it just like, oh man, I made a bad choice?
um, I'm the type of person that would not regret anything that I've done. I think it's all a great learning experience. Um, I think to answer truthfully, I don't really know what I had expected walking into my jobs. Um, I think I had an expectation that I would be designing, I would be doing all kinds of different tasks related to the product development cycle or the product cycle of the product. And I pretty much do that. It may not necessarily be in the form or the way that I imagined originally in college, or that the professors said, "Oh yeah, this is how you'll be doing it in industry." But in all honesty, as long as it gets to the point where I can help make that product a reality, that's really what matters to me.
All right, awesome. Um, so then now there's, you know, two more questions. So I'm gonna kind of mix and match these questions. So, what is the most important thing that you've done in your job that you've been really proud of, and what has been one of the most difficult things in your job?
Yeah, so I would say that the work that I'm most proud of is, in general, at a very high level, um, making sure that these products get out to the field safely, effectively, and on time. I think there's specific projects that I've worked on that were extremely fascinating. So there was one project where, um, in order to put an implant into the spine, you basically access the spine, or you access the back. You remove part of the vertebral disc, and then you place a spacer inside. And typically, the spacers are a certain size depending on the particular approach, whether you're coming in from the front of the body, or the side of the body, or from the back of the body. And the particular project that I worked on was an expandable implant, or an expandable cage. So it would initially be small and collapsed when it was going in into the initial incision. But then once you got it into the final location or the vertebral space that you wanted, you could deploy it and basically expand it. So it basically expanded, I think, by 300 or 400% to be able to give a little bit more space or a little bit more coverage to the vertebral body. And I think that was one of the coolest projects that I worked on. The engineers were extremely smart, extremely talented. I think they ended up winning an internal product design award for that project. But that's one of the projects that sticks with me ever since, was that expandable device. And I think that definitely changed the market, or that at least changed the way that we thought about implants at that time, because I think in the spine industry, um, especially for fusing the spine together and putting these spacers, the general consensus was that you pretty much have a particular size and you're locked into that. But with the expandable device, and the fact that you're able to expand in two different directions, and get a lot more space or a lot more ability for fusion there, um, I think that really was interesting, and that definitely just changed our viewpoints on that project.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, what was one of the most difficult things that you've had to encounter um, in your job?
Yeah. So this one is kind of just a general difficulty is trying to make sure that the product gets released on time, but also is as safe as possible. So making sure that whatever safety implementations you can make are done timely. If you have to push back a schedule, or if you have to be the one to make that call to delay testing or to delay the launch of the product, I think that's been the hardest calls that I've had to make, the hardest meetings I've had to pull together. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if I can show that it's not ready, it's not safe, it creates a hazard to the patient or to the surgeon, and the team understands that, I think that the team as a whole is obviously the team as a whole is very focused on getting the product out. And I think people have the best intentions, or the best, they want to do the best that they can to get this product out as quickly as possible. But if it's not safe, just pulling the trigger and just making sure that it's being held back is one of the toughest things I've had to do.
Yeah. It's interesting in your line of work. In school, typically, you don't hear too much about engineering ethics. You know, and then also too, there's a lot of money involved. And there's been examples, when people have pushed uh, products, or pushed the engineering, or just ignored they've ignored it, like, hey, look, this could be a potential danger, we need to stop and revisit this, and then they've pushed it. I mean, unfortunately, you have NASA, the two instances where they were warned, like, hey, we need to look into this, and then ultimately human life was lost. So it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's very commendable on your part to be like, no, let's revisit that. And a lot of people don't really look at that. It's all about meeting the deadline and the money.
It is, and I think I've been very fortunate in the companies that I've worked at. They've always been focused on the patient, and I think one of the president at my previous company used to say that good surgery is good business. His motto was that if you are doing a surgery safely, effectively, and efficiently, the surgeon at the end of the day is going to be happy with that, especially if they have good patient recovery or patient outcomes, and they're going to want to use your product over and over again, and they're going to evangelize it. If you have a product that fails or breaks 2 days into the recovery, or the patient develops an infection because of that, the surgeon is just never going to use your product again. So I think that phrase, good surgery is good business, definitely has stuck with me ever since. And actually, one ceremony that I went through in college as we were graduating was called a ring ceremony. And this dates back to, I think it's a Canadian tradition, where engineers would essentially take an oath, kind of similar to the Hippocrates oath for doctors, where they pledge that they're going to do no harm. Um, we basically had to take a pledge that we're going to use our engineering powers for good, the Avengers of engineering, if you will. And we got a little ring to symbolize our dedication to that. And the story of this, actually kind of similar to what you mentioned about NASA and being warned about this, goes back to a bridge that collapsed. So the engineers created this bridge, it collapsed, they redesigned it, it collapsed again, they redesigned it a third time, and it collapsed a third time. So they melted the steel, or so the story goes, they melted the steel from this bridge and forged it into rings that they would wear on their pinkies, so that every time they were creating a document or signing off or drawing something, they would always be reminded of those failures and make sure that it never happens again. Unfortunately, my ring got stolen when my car was broken into, but I like to think that I still have that ring around my finger at all times when I'm doing my work and trying to get the products out to the field as safely and effectively as possible.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow. try to, see if you can get that ring back. I mean,
It's funny. I asked. Since I went back to UCSD. I asked them if they had any extra rings lying around, and they said, "Yeah, you're welcome to have it, but it just may not have your particular graduation year on it." And I said, "You know what? The graduation year is the important part for me as well. I wanted to remember that I graduated that year, so I didn't end up trying to go digging through a bucket of unclaimed rings to try to find it.
you could have forged one.
I could.
So we have one more question from the audience. Is there something that you would like to achieve or do as you work as an engineer? I mean, just for you, not for the company.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before, actually. Um, so for me, uh, healthcare has, like I mentioned, has been kind of a way to help other people or kind of serve people, if you will, even though I'm not a doctor. And I think one thing I've always wanted to do, and one thing that I'd like to do in the future, is to really help facilitate training or bringing new technologies to developing nations. For me, India is very personal since my parents are from there and I still have a lot of extended family there. So I would love to be part of a role where I can help take a new robot or take new technology and train surgeons and really help them uh, bring that into their practice and bring that technology or bring um, that expertise to new areas.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, Nitin, I have to say, this has been a great interview this evening. And it was fun too. It was very
Oh yeah,
fun.
definitely had a lot of fun.
And we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit here and talk with us, answer questions from our students, give us more insight into you as a person and your academic journey. I mean, this was fun. I had a great time this evening. And we were also, I appreciate the fact that you are one of those individuals who are, you really care about those who you're serving. It's not about the product. you know
Absolutely.
it's about the person who's going to receive that product. you know
Exactly.
that's what's really important. And it's refreshing to hear that. It's refreshing to hear that. And you're still relatively young, so you're going to be in the business for a while.
The white hairs here suggest otherwise, but
Hey, that's what we call the stripes of the profession. You, if you got a few gray hairs, that tells you you're doing something right. So,
you hear that, Mom?
so we do really appreciate you, being here this evening. And also, you graduated from UC San Diego. So everyone, you know what? I put in the link, our tour for UC San Diego this Friday. It's a virtual tour. So please register for the tour. There we go. There we
There we
go.
go. Representing.
So I'm encouraging those of you to please, register for the tour and enjoy the service that we're providing. I mean, since we can't visit the campus, and even if we were meeting in person, we still can take you to the campus. So take advantage of this provision. Um, so Nitin, we thank you. And also thank you for allowing yourself to be open for students to contact you in the future if they have any questions.
Of
Uh,
course. Of course. I always look forward to speaking with students and would love to share, I wouldn't quite necessarily call it wisdom, but at least my experience and um, my little bit of advice at any time.
awesome, excellent. Well, we appreciate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and then we can carry on the conversation afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you, Rance, and thank you everyone for joining us.